Now that we've taken care of the console password, we're going to concentrate on the VTY passwords and do a Telnet lab that'll show us some details that don't always show up in books and other forms of education until it's too late. You'll see exactly what I'm talking about here in just a moment. Now, we've gone over physically connecting a laptop. We also went over Telnet and SSH in another section briefly, but we didn't do a lab. I do want to remind you that Telnet runs on TCP port 23 and SSH runs on TCP port 22. Typically, you're going to be outside a network when you use Telnet, but you can use it inside a network as well. If you're at a PC in your local network and you need to check something on a switch or a router in that same network, there's no need to physically visit it and set up the console cable and everything. Just Telnet to it. It's an easy way to do it. Now, we're going to Telnet from one Cisco router to another in this example, but there's one major rule that holds true for any Telnet configuration on a Cisco router or switch. You got to configure a password on the VTY lines. Without a password on the VTY lines, we're stopped right then and there. Let me show you exactly what I'm talking about, because I will test my connectivity here one more time, but we're just doing a simple Telnet from router 3 to router 1, 172.12.123.3 to .1. So let me first ping that real quick. And we're gold. So what happens when I try to Telnet? Password required but none set. Well, that's about as obvious a message as we're ever going to get in any kind of network security, right? Hey, you were supposed to set a password, but there isn't one, so you're stuck. So now what we need to do if we want to Telnet successfully to router 1 is to go to router 1 and set that VTY line password. And just a word here, you want to watch your number of VTY lines, because we're doing this on a switch. Most switches have 16 VTY lines, a router has 5. So to cover them all, we just have to do line VTY 0 and then 4, which includes lines 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if you count those on your fingers, like I just did, then there are 5 lines. Now, I know some of you who are getting ahead are already thinking, well, can I set a password for one line and then another and another? We will get to more complex security configurations when you're studying for your security exams. But let's just concentrate right now on a one password fits all solution for Telnet. Now, first off, let's go to router 1 and do the Telnet thing, do that setup. And we'll make CCNA the password this time. And that's all there is to it. You see the config prompt change to config line after I put that in. And we got the message login disabled until password is set. Then I set the password and we should be good to go. So let's find out. Let's go to 3. Now, instead of typing that command in, what could I have done to just repeat it immediately? Use the up arrow. I'm not huge on a lot of keyboard shortcuts. I'll show you one or two throughout the course. But that one I do find particularly handy because that goes through your command history. So let's try that now. And hey, we're being asked for a password. Again, it won't be shown to us when we're typing it in. Look at that. The prompt changes to router 1 and we are in. So it is just that easy to set a Telnet password. And again, you're going to have some vendors where they have asterisks that appear as you enter a password. But again, Cisco routers and switches do not. And you could see the prompts are something to watch too. We talked about the config modes and you have to watch, the parens, what's in them. But let's check out this mode that we got dropped in, because we were in privilege mode. We were in privilege exec mode when we telnetted from 3 to 1. But notice the default here that we were telnetted into, or put into when we telnetted into router 1. We were put in user exec mode. There's not a lot you can do from there. So, what should we do about that? Let's take a look at the next screen here. I want to talk to you about those modes for just 1 second and show you some examples on the board before so we're going to segue just a little bit. Believe me, the Telnet lab is not over. But when you first connect to a Cisco router or switch via Telnet or SSH, you can see by default where we were put, and that's user exec mode. In this mode, we have the little arrowhead, and that's it. And there's not much you can do here. Let's even use iOS help. This looks like, oh, look, there is a lot you can do. But as far as configuring anything, there really isn't. There's not much you can do here. There's a few show commands, but that's going to be about it. And you're not even going to be able to run all of those. So again, while this looks like a great list, you'll notice the word configure doesn't appear up here anywhere. So we can't do anything there. We can't run conft, because if we did that, this is exactly what we'd get. Again, invalid input marker showing near the beginning of the line means you're probably in the wrong mode. Now, to configure the router, of course, where do we need to go from here? We need to go into privilege exec mode. Well, to get there, you just type enable. That changes the prompt slightly. You see that to a pound sign. And now I can do conf terminal and do hostname or do whatever I want to from there. Just a regular configuration. It's something we've already seen a couple times in this course. Now, maybe, though, we want to set a password for enable mode. Maybe we don't want just anybody connecting to the router and just being able to go into enable mode and then the config modes from there. Maybe we just want somebody who's telnetting in to look around just to be able to look around. Well, let me show you another reason why we might want to set one of those passwords. Let me go ahead and get out of this. Sorry about the bar there. I can type this as many times as I want to. The same thing's going to keep happening. No enable password has been set on router 1. This is the little gotcha that I told you about. It's really easy, and I did this once myself, to forget about this part or not realize you have to do it. So I set a telnet password on a router that I was going to telnet into over the weekend and do a reload, because we didn't want to do it while the network was in production, while people were working on it. So, no problem. I didn't want to have to drive the 25 miles to, reload a router. So I just put a telnet password on. It's like, hey, I'll telnet in on Saturday, reload router, and everything will be just fine, right? Well, what happened was I set the VTY line and password, and then when I telnetted in, this is what I got, because the router didn't have an enable password. It's a telnet default. By default, someone who telnets in is going to be put in user exec mode where they really can't do much of anything, and then they've got to know the enable password. If no enable password has been set, you are sure out of luck, because you're not going to be able to do that remotely. Because what would I have to do right now to set an enable password? I would have to get into enable mode. and if I could do that, I wouldn't be setting an enable password now, would I? So that's a classic gotcha with Telnet. You've got to think of that in advance. There is a bit of a workaround, and I will show you that later in this part of the course. But next up, we're going to talk about enable password and enable secret. We're going to do a lab with those on another router and see which one takes precedence. You probably already know that, but we'll review that. And then we're going to go back to the Telnet lab from there and continue our lab. So I'll see you on the next video.